Hello. Thank you for having me. Let me begin with my traditional apology. I am by nature a fast talker. I was once known as the scourge of the United Nations Simultaneous Translation Corps. I would speak in what I thought was a very slow and measured tone, and I'd turn around and there would be a line of translator booths, and every one of them would be doing this. Couple that with the fact that I have now consumed almost enough coffee to drop a rhino, and it is a near certainty that I will start speaking quickly. And when I do, I invite you to do this and slow me down. So I wanted to talk today about some of what I think of as the prehistory of the Pirate Party and the movement that I think it is a flagship bearer for. I wanted to talk specifically about 1999 and the launch of Napster. When Napster launched, it became, at the time, the fastest adopted technology in the history of the world and went from 0 to 52 million users in 18 months. It was shut down by a court in 2001. When it was shut down, it had 52 million users. 1 year before it was shut down, 50 million Americans voted for the Democrats and 50 million Americans voted for the Republicans. In other words, there were enough Napster users that if they represented a political party, they would have handily won the American election and quite possibly would have elected a better president than the one that the Supreme Court chose. But of course, that's not what Napster users did. If you want to understand what Napster users did, just stop cleaning up your apartment for a few months. Walk into your kitchen and turn on the lights and watch all the cockroaches run under the cabinets. Because that's what Napster users did when they shut down Napster. We all felt like we'd been getting away with something naughty. And as soon as we were told that we'd been very naughty, most of us slunk away and said, I guess it was a good ride, but now it's over. Now, Napster was a remarkably industry-friendly technology as these things go. You may remember, those of you who were around a decade ago, that they had some venture capital funding from one of Silicon Valley's blue-chip VCs. And my understanding is that those VCs walked into the various record industries' offices with a check and said, you just tell me how many zeros you want us to write on this check for us to have a legitimate license to use your music. That's how many zeros we'll put on it. After all, Napster surveyed their users and found that more than half of them were willing to spend $15 a month to be a Napster user, which represented an ungodly sum of money for the music industry, potentially. $15 a month is a lot more than most people spend on music now, and a lot more than they spent on music then. What's more, the structure of Napster gave them a natural point where they could have audited usage and said, of the $15 we've collected from our users, this much goes to this artist and that much to that, because we know exactly what's been downloaded. Now, the shutdown of Napster didn't end file sharing, but it did end the creation of architectures for file sharing that were friendly to industry. Each subsequent iteration of file sharing infrastructure became less centralized, less subject to audit, less able to exclude people who hadn't paid. Over and over again, we saw the introduction of technologies, first Nutella, all the way up to trackerless torrents, that are the kind of entertainment industry equivalent of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, a superbug that they can't get rid of. Now, on the one hand, this is not new. Technology has, through history, created a series of innovations that made it hard to control individual uses of copyrighted works. The playing of a record on the radio, or the playing of recorded music in halls like this one through speakers in the ceiling, all of these made it hard to control the individual diffusion of works and hard to exclude people who hadn't paid from them from listening to them and enjoying them. Now, the solution to that problem over and over again, has been grounded in one of the most important American principles of commerce and ethics, which is money talks, bullshit walks, which is to say that as between the right to decide who gets to use your music and the right to be paid because people are using your music, getting paid is substantially more important for most people than merely choosing. In fact, this goes all the way back to radio, when legitimate artists, that was to say the artists that were popular on record, which is to say white, rich artists, not artists performing country music and not African-American artists, were represented by a rights society called ASCAP that wouldn't allow their music to be played on radio because they felt that radio was a pirate medium. And so a new rights society was created, BMI, that represented poor artists who performed country and Western music, and black artists, what were called race artists. And they were the only ones who got paid. And as a result, after a few years of this, all the so-called legitimate artists went to their rights societies and said, we don't care about our moral right to choose who listens to our music on the radio. We care about feeding our families. Screw our moral rights. Just get us paid. So when you step onto a stage at a karaoke bar, the barman doesn't figure out who Queen's manager is, where he lives, and call him up and say, someone is about to sing Bohemian Rhapsody. Do I owe them 25 cents or 30 cents? Instead, that barman, just like the manager of this venue and the manager of the airport and the manager of hotels and so on, pays a single fee that gets them the right to play any music they want, and that music is collected and then distributed to artists. Now, that could be the way that ISPs do it. You could pay a few euros per customer, and for it, the customers could get the right to download anything that they wanted in any format from anywhere and play it. Now, there are lots of ways that this could go terribly, terribly wrong. First, it could be mandatory for ISPs, which meant that instead of the labels and the collecting societies setting a fair price that represented the value that ISPs thought that they could get, and not a fee that was so high that the enforcement costs would outstrip the cost of the value they would get from it. Instead, they could just name a very, very high price and then use the tax money that you and I pay to collect it, because it would be mandatory and the ISPs would be required to do it by law. We need this to be voluntary. And after all, there are lots of ISPs that would love to be able to advertise, we're just like the ISP down the road, but our ISP comes with all the music ever recorded for free. The collecting society could be corrupt. After all, most of them are. They could be designed... They could be designed to only pay big labels or pay the labels disproportionately. A truly 21st century collecting society, on the other hand, could be built with the analytical intelligence of Google and the transparency of GNU Linux. The analytical methods used by the collecting society could be invasive. Instead of using statistical methods to figure out who was listening to what and who to pay, they could spy on all of our network traffic to figure out what we were doing. But these are implementation details. They're not deal breakers. Advocating blanket licenses for online music for downloading would be a huge win for pirates and for copyright reformers in general. But to understand why, first we need to ask ourselves what copyright is for. Now, I'm of the opinion that copyright can be good and that we can have a good copyright system provided that it is confined to merely regulating the entertainment industry. After all, there's nothing wrong with the idea that industries should be regulated. We like the idea that we could have regulations that protect the public, like regulations against unfair lending practices in banks. We like the idea that we could have regulations that protect members of the supply chain from abuse through the natural choke points. Now, many European nations have had this technical idea that the purpose of copyright was to regulate culture and to protect artists. But if you look at the history of copyright, it has always been written with the entertainment industry's supply chain in mind and has always been run that way. The problem is that it's metastasized. We used to have this test to determine whether or not you were in the entertainment industry, and it was whether you were making a copy. Because people who made copies in the old days had record presses or printing presses or film labs. Today, we copy a million times before breakfast. We copy like we brush our teeth. Now, that doesn't mean that we're all suddenly a part of the entertainment industry. It means the entertainment industry needs to start cabining in more closely who falls under its regulation. Now, if you were playing Sim Regulator and you wanted to establish a good copyright system, one that made all of your Sims very happy, how would you measure whether or not you were successful? I don't think you could do it by measuring the total amount of money that was earned under your system. After all, if I had a movie regulation system that produced a single movie every year that made me $1 trillion and prohibited everyone else from making any movies at all, I think we'd probably call it a failure. I think a successful copyright system is one that allows the widest diversity of creators to make the widest diversity of works that's enjoyed by the widest diversity of audiences. In other words, if you and I were playing a Sim Regulator tournament, and in your Sim, your rule produced X works by Y artists enjoyed by Z people, and mine produced X plus 1 works produced by X plus 1 artists enjoyed by Z plus 1 people, then I would win the tournament. But copyright is also a monopoly on copying, performance, and distribution. And like every monopoly, copyright warps the minds of people who enjoy it. They see themselves not as participants in an ecosystem, but as its natural lords. Like everyone who finds himself at the top of a social order, entertainment executives conclude that the social order is a fair meritocracy, and that they are at its peak because they're the best people in the universe. This kind of ugly reasoning leads people who embrace it to conclude that even if they suppress or oppress or rip off artists, they're still serving art, since a good copyright system is one that rewards the best people, and they are the best people. Therefore, copyright is doing its job. If we're going to win the regulatory, legal, and political battles on the issue of copyright, we need to smoke out the entertainment industry on this. We need to show that what they're in the business of is protecting their own interests, not culture, not creativity, and not the wider interests that are meant to be served through their regulation. Because the purpose of all the litigation, lobbying, and laws that the entertainment industry creates is not to reduce the amount of copying on the internet. The entertainment industry knows very well that DRM won't stop copying. They know that you can't operate a service like YouTube and prevent copyright infringement. After all, YouTube gets an hour of video every second. If every copyright lawyer that ever lived did nothing but review YouTube videos for 16 hours a day, they'd never make a dent in it. We'd run out of copyright lawyers before we hit the heat death of the universe. So why does the industry continue to embrace DRM? Why is Viacom suing YouTube? Well, start with DRM. DRM isn't technically challenging to break. You just can't hide a secret in user equipment and expect that no user anywhere will figure out how to extract it. And certainly, it's not hard for manufacturers to figure out how to beat DRM. Just look at all those region-free players from everyone from no-name companies all the way up to Sony. But it's against the law to break DRM, even if you're not violating copyright law, which means that when manufacturers produce commercial products that have features that DRM prevents, you're breaking the law. So imagine that we were back in 1996, and you went into a record store, and you bought €1,000 worth of DVDs and €1,000 worth of CDs. DVDs were just introduced. You put them all in a vault, in a safe. And you waited 15 years, and you went and you retrieved them. In the 15 years, your CDs will have accumulated in value, because even though we don't use CDs very much anymore, you could rip them. And having ripped them, you can make them into ringtones and alarm tones. You could stream them, back them up, mash them up, upload them, do all of those things that we do, realize all of that new value from your CDs. But DVDs, because they have DRM, it's illegal for anyone to make a product that allows you to do anything with them that the studios don't like. And so in 15 years, your DVDs have accumulated no new value. They can do exactly what they could do in 1996. Time stands still for DRM. Now, back when I worked for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, I attended a lot of DRM standards body meetings, including the DVB standardization for European TV DRM. And the motion picture industry representatives proposed all kinds of insane flags for their DRM. And one of them that was really weird, they had a flag called Do Not Retransmit. And when it was set on a program, you couldn't watch that program in a room other than the one it was being received on. You couldn't have a receiver in your sitting room and then a wireless retransmitter up into the bedroom so you could watch in a set upstairs. And when I asked the person from the MPA, why is that flag there? What theory of copyright makes you think that a rights holder gets to tell you what room you can watch TV in? He said, look, watching a show in one room that's being received in another room has value. And if it has value, we need to be able to charge money for it. Now, I call this the urinary tract infection business model. With analog media and digital media that doesn't have DRM, all of the value flows in a kind of healthy gush. But once you add DRM to it, every new feature comes in a painful drip. Every button on your remote has a price tag associated with it. The industry's focus is not on preventing piracy. It's on controlling competition. The copyright wars are not an existential struggle for the entertainment industry. They are a profit maximization strategy. The goal is to ensure that new products are only introduced after they have been vetted to ensure that they don't disrupt the natural order of the marketplace, the order that has them at the top. Now back to blanket licenses. A world in which we had fairly administered blanket licenses for downloading would allow users to keep all the value that came with their music, to buy, make, sell, or give away new technologies that add value to music, even if that new value forecloses on some totally speculative new business model for the entertainment industry. It would also allow new entrants to the marketplace. An indie artist would have the same crack at the pool of funds being collected as the artists who've been made to sell their souls to the labels. And the labels would hate it. But every time they spoke out against blanket licenses, we could point to all those other blanket licenses, the ones that they control, and we could say how, and then the ones that they figured out how to fiddle. And we could ask whether those licenses should be abolished too. If we get blanket licenses, there would suddenly be no music-related reason to censor or surveil the internet. And it would set a precedent. Anytime some other group of rights holders showed up and said, we need to censor, we need to surveil, we need to break the internet in order to protect our business, they would face the specter that someone would say, why don't we just make your stuff available on a blanket license too? €3 for internet service with all the music, €5 for the internet service with all the music and all the movies. This puts pirates and other copyright reformers in the position of demanding more money for artists, and labels and big content in the position against advocating for the only proven solution and in favor of speculative revenue maximization strategies that revolve around the idea that there's gold in selling the right to watch a movie on Wednesdays while standing on one foot between the hours of 10:14 and 11:27 p.m. Now, this could be a winning strategy for pirates. At every turn, we can advocate for fair, internet-native solutions to solve the problem of creators, audiences, and technologists. For example, think of popular music sharing. Think of music sampling. Incorporating snatches of one song into another is a long and integral part of all music performance. It's the basis for styles like calypso, and it's been widely practiced in popular music, from legendary jazz solos that grab a few bars of another performer's song and riff on them to the excerpt from La Marseillaise that opens the Beatles' All You Need Is Love. It's a feature in classical music, of course, where themes from one composer find their way into other composers' works. And it's a feature in many live performances. An example that's sort of regionally appropriate was in Prešov in Slovakia. There was a performer named Lukáš Kmitu, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, who in 2011 was performing on the violin when someone's Nokia phone started to ring. And as the audience fell silent and the violin stopped, everyone turned to look at the man whose phone was ringing. But then they turned back to look at the violinist because he began to improvise a 5-minute virtuoso performance based on that hated, much-played ringtone. Analog sampling is legal. Copyright systems always recognized it as seemly, proper, and legitimate for a few notes from one song to find their way into another. When the first digital samples were incorporated into hip-hop, no one worried about copyright. If anyone gave it a thought, they probably assumed that digital samples had the same legal status as analog ones. Is it really so different to recreate a few snatches of someone else's music with a sampler instead of a guitar? What followed was the flowering of a new genre, one that had widespread commercial, critical, and cultural and popular success. Albums like Public Enemy's 1990 It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back and the Beastie Boys' 1989's Paul's Boutique netted millions and changed the face of music. They used hundreds of samples each and didn't get permission for any of them. They invented new musical techniques like layering several drum beats on top of one to make a hyperbeat. But since then, the screws have tightened. A combination of legislation and precedent has established an ironclad industry practice of clearing every sample. As Kembrew McLeod and Peter DeCola showed in Creative License, none of the classical hip-hop albums could be made today. Paul's Boutique, one of the most commercially successful records of all time, would lose nearly $20 million if it were made today. Most legal hip-hop songs today contain only one sample or perhaps two. Anything more would be too expensive. An entire genre of music, the sort that uses more than 2 samples per song, has no legal existence. It can be heard, but anyone who creates it is liable to legal punishment and can't make any money from it. There's a genre's worth of musicians who either don't create or, if they do create, can't get paid. That can't be what copyright's for. Now, there's a large pool of music that can be sampled without permission. That's the public domain music. But, of course, the extension of copyright terms means that almost anything you've heard of now belongs to one of 4 labels, and the labels won't license to you, generally speaking, unless you're already signed to a label. So this creates the terrible situation in which, in order to make sample-based music, you must first sign with a label and take the crappy contract they offer you. Now, there's some evidence that requiring licenses for digital samples did something good. They provided a small but important income stream to an earlier generation of artists, mostly African-American artists, who got screwed 3 ways. First, because the rules were written with corporations and not artists in mind. And second, because the corporations cheated. And third, because justice has never been widely available to people of African-American descent in the United States. If licensing sampling turns out to be the least worst way to address that old wrong, then copyright could create a streamlined system of licenses that makes it easy to license and stages compensation in proportion to follow-on artist earnings. It would be ungainly, but better than nothing, and certainly better than shutting everything down. And more to the point, advocating it would again put pirates in the shoes of advocating for more money for artists and a fairer deal for everyone, and the labels in advocating for less money for people who create. Limiting copyright scope to the entertainment industry frees us to design copyright rules that treat copying as a fact and don't seek to regulate it. These copyright rules would regulate the industry and not the world. For example, when America was founded, we know that the Constitution's framers created a copyright that lasted for 14 years and was renewable once. I've written a short 2-act play to illustrate how that worked. Act 1. The scene. A publisher's office in colonial America. The publisher, wearing a green eye shade, presides over a huge cast iron press, standing behind a countertop surmounted by a bushel of sickly potatoes. The author, dressed in ragged trousers, enters, carrying a large manuscript, which he thrusts upon the publisher. The author: "I have written a novel." The publisher takes the manuscript and peruses it. The publisher: "Not bad, my fine fellow. If thou wouldst assign me thine copyright, I will remunerate you most handsomely with yonder potato." Author: "Just one potato? It took me a year." Publisher: "If thou doubts my sincerity, I invite you to offer this manuscript to the scoundrels down the road. I understand they are paying authors in half carrots." The author: "Do you really need my whole copyright?" What if I just license some of it to you? The publisher, ah, but this is how we protect our investment in thine work. Once thou hast assigned unto me thine copyright, I can use it to sue yonder down-the-road scoundrels who would otherwise happily put out a pirate edition. The author, well, publisher offers a contract in one hand, a potato in the other. The author takes them. Curtain. Act 2. The publisher's office, 14 years later, and much enriched. Many presses clank away in the background, attended by busy, efficient laborers. The publisher has grown fat and satisfied in his dotage. The author enters, even thinner and more down at heels than before. The author, you sent for me, sir. The publisher, oh yes, so nice to see you again. You're looking, well. The author, I don't suppose you have any more potatoes? The publisher, indeed, sir, I do. And all I require is that you sign this copyright renewal form so I can post it straight away to the Library of Congress. The author, yes, I see my novel is in bookstores everywhere. I've forgotten that the copyright was due to expire. That must be terrible for you when that happens. After all, you've made such a good living from it. The publisher, if you'd just sign right here. The author, oh, I'll sign. But before I take pen in hand, let us discuss the matter of book royalties and my fee for the renewal. The publisher, come now, sir. If thou wouldst not sign this paper, why, thy novel would fall into the public domain, and the scoundrels down the road would begin to print up a competing edition. The author, I don't see what that has to do with me. Publisher, sir, wouldst thou have thy novel published by a scoundrel? The author gives the publisher a significant look. The publisher squirms. Curtain. The end. And that is one way of designing copyright that protects investors' investment without screwing creators. Now, all this sounds like it might solve some problems with the entertainment industry and with the poor suckers whom they exploit, writers and musicians and other creatives. But after all, why should we care about these things? Culture endures. It always has. Because the copyright wars are only the first skirmish in a long-coming fight over whether we will solve our social problems with spyware and surveillance. Because DRM always converges on rootkits. The point of DRM is to hide from the user, to override users' decisions and instructions, and to prevent the user from disabling it. Copyright surveillance always converges on generalized surveillance. Once you spy on people's entertainment choices, you're spying on their general network usage, and that means that you're spying on everything. And copyright blocks always converge on censorship, because as we saw with SOPA, you can't make a law that prohibits circumventing DNS blocking without also prohibiting DNSSEC. And you can't make a rule that prohibits circumventing IP blocking without prohibiting Tor. The world is made of computers. When the iPod or the Walkman that you grew up listening to catches up with your hearing in 20 or 30 years and you get a hearing aid, it will be a computer that you put in your body. And the cars, houses, and airplanes and computers that we live with, the cars, houses, and airplanes we live with are computers that we put our bodies into, which means that every social problem that we have will arrive at the same solution. Make me a computer that can run every program except for one that pisses me off because it lets you print out a solid-state meth lab or turn a software-defined radio into an air traffic control system or screw up Monsanto's business model by outputting synthetic molecules that it cut into its profits. Make me a network that allows anyone to communicate with anyone else using any protocol unless the messages they send frighten me or cost me money or undermine the social network. For the last 10 years, we have been fighting with our best players to stop the copyright wars because we thought that the copyright industry was the final boss. But it turns out that they've just been the first mini-boss of a long, long game. But like all good level designers, fate sent us a relatively soft target to test ourselves on. We have a chance, a real chance, to keep the network free and open by supporting free and open systems. And of course, we must win the copyright wars to keep the internet and the PC free and open. These are the material in all the wars that are to come. With your support of organizations like the Pirate Party, and more broadly, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Creative Commons, the Free Software Foundation, and the movements they represent, we can do it. we can win the copyright wars, and that will give us the standing to win all the wars that are to come. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, do we have time for questions? Do we have time for questions? Yeah? Thank you. So I appreciate the applause, but I think we've got like 4 minutes for questions. So stop clapping so that we can have some questions. Are there any questions? It's part of a book that I've written called Information Doesn't Want to Be Free, People Do. And I've just finished it, so it will be CC when it comes out. You can certainly treat, I hereby grant you all rights under all media now known and yet to be invented throughout all universes to use that talk. So, yeah, go ahead. Yes?
Thank you. Basically, it's created a situation where in places like Europe and America for the last 30 years, the economies have run basically on two things. Cost-cutting by sending jobs to places like China. Then I forgot the second one, which is...
The blood of babies.
Borrowing.
Borrowing, yes.
Which gets us to 2008, which gets us to Lehman Brothers, which gets us to Greece and Spain and Italy and the whole ball of wax.
Well, so I think that you're right in that the fact that copyright was such an easy way to attack competition and criticism has made it a kind of the weapon of first recourse for large corporations and corrupt institutions. Yeah, no, but for everyone. Sure. I mean, I think it's just Chekhov's law, right? When you put a gun on the mantelpiece in Act 1, it'll go off by Act 3. But I'm talking about something a little different here. What I'm talking about is not using copyright to attack competition or free speech or criticism. I'm talking about using the mechanism that copyright arrived at, which is putting spyware in devices. So that, the war on drugs, right now they say, well, maybe we should be able to tap phones in order to find drug dealers. But in the future, they may say, maybe we should design things that are capable of outputting compounds through some digital process with a snitch chip that watches everything you do in case you're outputting a precursor for crystal meth, right? And I think that's actually a different problem. It has the same root, and I talked about this. I'm sure many of you have seen my CCC talk from Berlin. I talked about this there, that it's a lot of regulators assume, not necessarily unreasonably, that you can take a feature away from a computer without doing disfiguring violence to the computer, the same way you could take a feature away from a dishwasher and it would still be useful for washing dishes. It just doesn't have a cutlery basket anymore. But we can't make a computer that can run all the programs except one. All we can do is make a computer that runs all the programs but has spyware on it out of the box to stop you from running the program we want to stop you from running. And as soon as we design computers that hide what they're doing from their owners, even if the people who put that facility in are trustworthy and of goodwill, other people who aren't trustworthy and of goodwill will make use of that facility to abuse them. Are we out of time? No?
You can move half a meter to the right for the cameras?
Half a meter to the right for the cameras. Right. Yes? Yeah?
Do you know that someone is writing a novel about EMP emission from the sun and the final rescue of the Earthlings because we have to know how to fight the EMP from the sun?
No, I don't know that.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thanks.
Okay. Never let it be said that the Pirate Party's issues are narrow and earth. Right, it's a universal movement. Thank you. An issue of galactic importance. Go ahead.
Okay, we can envision a horror scenario where we have trusted platforms everywhere, so we can only run signed operating systems. Then we can also envision that internet access will also only be granted to people running these trusted platforms. What do you think are the ways we could act against this? One idea would be having an own open chip fab or open source and trying legislation, but it's looking like the industry is getting the upper hand sometimes.
Right. So it's a similar kind of question to what do you do if someone gets to an airport and is really well organized and wants to get a bomb or a knife on a plane? The answer is you're too late, right? As Bruce Schneier says, the only successful way really that we have to stop hijackings and airplane bombings is like with the police, not with checks, because of course 75% of weapons get through those metal detectors and the porno scanners and so on. So if we get to the point where they've already taken away all of our computers and replaced them with spy chips, and where all the networks have ubiquitous surveillance, it's too late. And I think that historically there have been kind of two very counterproductive attitudes from the technology side to that possibility. The first is what I call nerd fatalism, which goes like this. All politics are shit, and everybody who does politics ends up smelling like shit. Therefore, I won't go anywhere near politics. And then the other one is nerd determinism that goes like this. My superior technology makes your inferior law irrelevant. Pass any stupid law you want, and I will get around it with Tor. The problem is that in both cases, you end up with a fail. You end up with a fail because the law is stronger than your technology. The law is stronger than your technology because it ends up with lots and lots of collateral damage, and it ends up beating the hell out of the whole ecosystem that produces the gains of Moore's law, the gains, cheap access to electronics, and so on, and it knocks you back. So I think that the right time to stop ubiquitous surveillance in chips and ubiquitous control in chips and ubiquitous surveillance in networks is before it happens. It's now. No, we don't. I mean, we have UEFI coming, but we don't have UEFI in most of the Western so-called liberal democracies. UEFI won't come with a mandate that says that can only run state-approved operating systems. It seems unlikely that'll happen. But it's not so. It's not clear, for example, whether or not that constitutes whether breaking that will constitute a circumvention under the DMCA or the UCD. Like it's. I mean, it may be that Iran says UEFI means that you can only run operating systems signed by the Iranian government, but I don't think that the West is going to do that. And I think that, for example, if you're worried about that circumstance, supporting Software Freedom Law Center, who are the most likely litigants in a question about UEFI and whether or not UEFI constitutes a circumvention, is a great way to do it. And not just financially supporting them, but write an email to Eben and say, I'm here. What can I do to stop UEFI? What can I do to keep it open? When the first lawsuits and legal battles around strong crypto took place, there was a feeling that technical arguments would win the day. We showed up in court. The Electronic Frontier Foundation showed up in court. They showed up in meetings on the Hill, and they said, look, we can't secure America's banks without access to strong crypto. And the crypto that the NSA says is strong enough isn't strong enough. We can break it. John Gilmore built a cracker. He built a DES cracker for $250,000 and brought it into a courtroom and brute forced DES 52 in front of a judge, right? And nobody cared. But you know what they cared about? They cared about a mathematician named Dan Bernstein who had published source code and instructional material, learned papers, mathematical papers, that explained how to make ciphers that were stronger than DES 52. And the court understood that telling university-affiliated mathematicians that they can't publish math was not what they thought of as the characteristics of a just society. Impact litigation, that sort of striking down, that very elegant way of striking down a law, depends on a bad law and a good defendant and good facts. And that's what Dan had, right? By contrast, 2600, which had great facts, and a bad law, which is when DCSS was published in the pages of 2600 magazine, didn't have good defendants. I mean, 2600 are amazing people, and Emmanuel Goldstein's an amazing guy, but our defendants weren't eminent mathematicians from Berkeley. They were guys in black T-shirts that said things that the judge didn't understand, right? So if you write to Eben and you say, who do we need in the UEFI fight to be the test case that makes it unambiguously lawful to jailbreak UEFI and to distribute jailbroken UEFI kits and so on? What's the characteristic? What kind of person doing what kind of thing? And then you help him look all over the world for that person. We can, in one stroke, one lawsuit, make it unambiguously lawful to do that in large territories, at which point the idea of locking down UEFI becomes irrelevant. A non-starter. Are we out of time? One more question. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, shout and I'll repeat it. All right, here comes a mic.
Okay, so I'm Justas from Pirate Party, Lithuania. You mentioned open source software, free software foundation, but there is also rise of open source hardware, and with availability of, for example, 3D printers, when people will be sued, for example, for printing some chair or table, it will be a next issue for Pirate Party again.
I've heard that, right? I once went to hear the then head of the BPI, which is like the IFP affiliate, like the RIA for England, for Britain. I heard him give a talk to an inter-industry group, and he said, all you people, you think we in the record industry were so stupid because, Napster came along, we all ran around like headless chickens, and here we are 10 years later, and we totally failed to address it. But you just wait. 3D printers are coming, and when they come, they're going to screw all of you up too, because you won't be able to protect your trademarks and patents and so on. And as I was leaving, a friend I was with said, it's kind of, forward-looking for someone from the entertainment industry to be thinking about 3D printers. This was like 5 years ago, and I said, yeah, but he thinks the major impact of a 3D printer is going to be trademark infringement. That's like going, the railroad is coming, and all you people who make a living sewing up the bags that they put the oats in for horses, you're all going to be out of a job, right? It's true, right? But that was not the major impact of the railroad. So, if you want to think about like major policy battles over 3D printers, think about solid-state meth labs or compound scale microassembly or bioassembly using cultures that are grown and then laid out on a lattice using 3D printers. All of those things, I think, are far weirder and more interesting than mere trademark infringement, and are likely to be the major battles. I mean, if we see trademark wars over 3D printers, they'll be like such a minor skirmish on the way to the major fight. But ultimately, 3D printers only matter when they're connected to general-purpose computers and networks. And so again, if we're going to win this war, we need to make sure that our focus is on networks and computers, not merely their peripherals or their uses for this or that. So thank you.
Thank you, Cory.